So yeah, hi, I'm Simon. I'm going to give a talk about how to level up as a developer, whatever that might mean. Who knows? Hopefully we'll find out. This is version 3 of this talk. It's new and improved, I think. There was a QR code at the end for some feedback. So if you can tell me how it went, that would be awesome. So a little bit about me. I am senior platform engineer at a company called Motorway. You may have seen our awesome car adverts. Sell your car the Motorway way. There we go. Yes. I'm also the co-organizer of Brighton Cloud. I'm also an RAF Air Cadet instructor. I've been doing that, well, since I was 14. I just kind of forgot to leave. So now I'm part of the staff team. I'm an apprentice DIYer, much to my wife's dismay. I start a lot of projects. Some of them get finished. And I play some games. So we'll start off with a warning. This talk is massively opinionated because it's based essentially on me, or rather my career and my opinions, obviously with a little bit of Googling. So take what you hear tonight with a pinch of salt. Hopefully it will be of use. So if we're going to talk about leveling up, it's probably a good idea to define what is a level. Some examples of a level there. Pop quiz for those in the room. Does anyone know what the middle picture is of? Someone said it. It is a Doom map. It is level 1 of Doom. And the last one's obviously Diablo 3. Anyway, so levels. They could be classic job titles. So junior developer, senior developer, lead developer. Some of you probably have those as job titles. They are taken from an example CV. Classic career ladder path, if you like. Obviously, it goes on a bit further now after lead in more enlightened times. You could have a big tech job title. So something like associate engineer, senior engineer, staff engineer, senior staff engineer, principal engineer. Okay, some of those have levels. That's taken from Circle CI's engineering competency matrix. Some of you may have seen these. Lots of companies in Silicon Valley now have basically career ladders for developers, and they will define the various levels. So they're kind of like the job titles, and then with that you might have different levels. So there might be 3 levels of staff engineer, for example, and they have a matrix by which you can level up effectively, kind of like promotions. Well, exactly like promotions. Is it based on your overall experience or knowledge? So obviously when you start something, you're a beginner. You don't start as an expert. Everyone has to learn. Beginner, novice, intermediate. Then you might become proficient at something, perhaps then advanced, and maybe even an expert in a particular thing. They're obviously just words taken from the dictionary that describe progression on a particular topic. So there was an article when I Googled this many years ago, how to level up or leveling up as a developer. Jeff Atwood, who's the co-founder of Stack Overflow, among other things, he wrote an article many years ago called The 8 Levels of Programmers. And I thought, oh, we'll just whiz through that just for a bit of comedy. So at the bottom, you're a bad programmer. You write code, but you really shouldn't. Please stop. Anyone ever known one of these? Is that person now your manager? They exist. They're quite rare because I think, generally speaking, if you're doing something as a job, you've got to be vaguely competent at it. And I think the people that at this level would get weeded out from certainly careers pretty quick. The unknown programmer. So you're competent but unremarkable. Coding pays the bills. I mean, I think that would probably apply to literally everyone in the room. That we're all vaguely at this level. Everyone has a job doing coding. It pays the bills. I would imagine some of us are more advanced than that as well. An amateur programmer. So you've got a genuine enthusiasm for coding and technology, including outside of work. So you're not just doing this as your 9-to-5 job. You hack around on some code outside of work, whether it's playing with a different language. Maybe you actually contribute to open source. Maybe you just do work outside of work hours because you really like work. But you've got that enthusiasm for actual technology. The average programmer. So you're good enough to know that you're not great, and you probably never will be, but that's fine. You know, not everyone's going to be, you know, the next big tech startup founder, a ridiculously famous engineer giving talks all around the world. I know I'm certainly not going to be, and that's totally fine. The working programmer. So you've got a successful career as a developer. You're always in demand, respected by your peers. I would imagine there's more than a handful of those in the room. I think this is probably where most people would get to if you're on this, certainly on this scale. A famous programmer. So you're famous in programming circles. People have heard of you and you're making an impact. So maybe you've written a very popular open source library. Maybe you give talks at meetups or conferences, but you know, people have heard of you from either around the country, around the world, in your industry. You know, you're a bit bigger than your local workplace or community. A successful programmer. You're well known and you've created an entire business around your code. You get to choose what to work on. So basically, if you founded a nice startup or similar, you made a bunch of cash and you're successful, so you just get to pick what I want to work on, because you don't have to worry about paying bills. That's already sorted. What's interesting to me? I'm going to go and explore that. Maybe I'll do the same thing again. Or maybe you're a dead programmer. You're part of the permanent historical record of computing. Other programmers study your work. And on the article, he named at least 2 programmers that were still alive at the time. So comments were obviously made. These people aren't dead yet. I don't even think they still are. So they're very much alive. But again, it's the kind of people who are very famous around the world for programming. You know, they've written books that everyone's read. Everyone's heard of them for particular feats of engineering, etc. So we've spoken about job titles, we've spoken about random blog posts, but there isn't a real answer. Leveling up, or certainly like levels, you can't find a definitive answer. There is no start here, end here. So the real question, where do you want to be in 3, 5, or 10 years' time? Hands up if you have a career plan. The screens have gone. Oh, there we go. And we're back. Random. Quick show of hands in the room. Anyone have some vague idea of what they want to be doing in, say, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Few hands, if. Okay. It's a really good question to ask. So a little bit about that. Career planning. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? How do you get there? Because levels are very much defined effectively by you. What do you want to do? So where are you now? If you're thinking about this probably for the first time, those of you who didn't raise your hand a minute ago, what are you good at? What are you bad at? What are you great at? You know, what are your strengths and weaknesses within, you know, development career? Maybe you're really good at Drupal. Maybe you're really good at front end stuff. Maybe you're a JavaScript whiz. What are those things? What are you bad at as well? You know, everyone's bad at some things. What do you enjoy? What do you tolerate? And what do you hate doing? I hate writing JavaScript. Absolutely detest it. Okay. I love writing Terraform. For those of you who don't know, it's an infrastructure as code language. So yeah, it's kind of like, think about what parts of your job now do you really like? What do you tolerate because it's your job? And what, if you had the choice, would you never, ever do again? Do you have any family or financial commitments? Not everyone's like young, free and single, can gallivant around the world. Some people have, you know, real life things that tie them to a particular place or restrict them in some kind of way. The idea with this is you're being honest, but not overly critical. So you're not basically doing the thing of, oh, everything's terrible, I'm never going to get anywhere. It's like, you know, an objective look at where you are at the moment. Where do you want to be? Anyone know where they want to be? 3, 5, 10 years. What level do you want? We've just picked a few. Were you like, oh yeah, job titles, they look good. Principal engineer, fancy that. That looks good. Maybe you want to be the CTO of a startup. Maybe you want to be the CEO of a big company. Don't know. Where do you want to be? What kind of role do you want? Do you want to be a developer? Do you want to actually go into, I don't know, marketing or sales or do something completely different? What role do you want? What kind of company do you want to work for? Do you want to work for like a tech firm? Do you want to work for like a generic big multinational? What industry do you want to work in? Lots of people won't work in certain industries because they, morally opposed to them. But you just might not find it particularly interesting. So what kind of industries do you want to work in? Oh, so weird. Where do you want to work? Do you want to work in Brighton? Do you want to work in London? Do you want to work from a sunny beach halfway across the world? Like where do you want to work from? What kind of lifestyle do you want? Lifestyles of the rich and the famous? Or quiet life in the country? What do you fancy? Yeah, and someone nodding to quiet life in the country. Definitely. What are the intermediate steps? So obviously you kind of looked at where you are now. Maybe you're like a junior developer just starting out. Maybe you're halfway through your career, but you want to change it. You know where you want to get to. How are you going to get there? What are the steps? So does your situation allow radical changes or require more incremental steps? So again, if you've got commitments at home, you're going to struggle making radical changes potentially. So how are you going to factor that in? Do you have missing skills or knowledge, which we're coming on to in a minute? So maybe you completely lack a particular skill set, or you don't know anything about a particular technology that you want to get working. So that's going to need to be addressed. Are there any stepping stone rules you take? So if you want to be like the CTO of a company or an engineering leader, it's unlikely that you're going to go to a job advert as a mid-level developer and apply and be successful. So you're probably going to need to work your way through some levels to get to that particular role. Do you need to relocate? Obviously, if you're in Brighton and you want to be the other side of the world, it's a bit far. So obviously that will need planning. Do you need to change your lifestyle, like either in the short term or the long term? So do you need to cut back on stuff so that you can afford to do radical things later on? All of this stuff is kind of like worth thinking about, even loosely. Yeah, this doesn't have to be like, set in stone as a plan forever, but it should give you an idea of where do I want to get to? What kind of things do I need to learn? Where do I want to end up? And which isn't to say that it can't change. I certainly, when I started my career, didn't think, I'm going to be doing infrastructure. I mean, most of the stuff that I do now didn't even exist when I started. So, you can't plan that far ahead. So that's great, Simon. But how? How do I level up? I've got a career plan. I've just thought of it while you were talking. I know exactly what I want to do. How am I going to get there? I would say, regardless of what level you're looking at, there's two things that you would want to improve or increase: your impact and the context that you have. So impact would be the effect of your work on a specific problem, situation, or topic. Context, the amount of information you have about a specific problem, situation, or topic. So, for example, you could have massive impact with very little context by fixing a very critical bug in your production system, which saves your company from basically losing loads of money. Yeah, so massive impact, very little context. You could have loads of context and very little impact, technically speaking, simply by maybe you're like a CTO, for example, which is not to say they don't have impact, but from a technical point of view, they're not involved in that level of detail. Does that make sense? So they're not going to be able, they're not unlikely to be the ones in a big company, especially coming in, saving the day, fixing a bug. So yeah, two things: impact and context. So how are we going to improve those to help us level up? Oh, that's the wrong way. There we go. So as I said, impact for developers is predominantly going to be around your technical skill set. Yeah. So as a developer, you're going to struggle to have any impact if you're not very good technically. That's kind of like what we do, right? We're technical people. That's how we impact our business, how we achieve things. So in terms of feature delivery, if you're increasing your technical skills, you're going to be able to design and build more complex features. Yeah, so when you first start out, someone's probably giving you a very narrow task. Please go and do that. Thank you. Bit of support, some context, away you go, do that. By the time you get to like senior staff, principal engineer levels, you're going to be designing, and building potentially complete systems, massive projects. If you're running a company, if you're running an agency, for example, you're going to be doing quite big things. And to be able to do those successfully, you're going to need good technical skills. You'll be able to think about edge cases, performance, reliability, security, scaling, all of those things that, a lot of people don't really pay attention to, because it's just not at the forefront of their mind when they're writing their code, when they're deploying their systems. In terms of incidents and bugs, you'll be able to find and fix more esoteric issues. So has anyone worked with someone where you've been looking at a particular problem, someone just comes along who's really technically skilled, looks at it and goes, let's try this. Away we go. 5 minutes later, oh yeah, look, there's the problem. And you're like, say what? Yeah, I've worked with a few of those. Kind of like, and everyone learns something. You're like, I did not know that was a thing, and now I do. That's amazing. But yeah, that will be you, because once you've learned these things and you become more technically skilled across a broader spectrum, you'll be able to spot those kind of problems. And you'll be really good at providing code reviews, meaningful code reviews, not you're missing a brace or other such pettiness, which should be done by a linter anyway. But yeah, so like code reviews are another good skill. Okay. And if you're really good technically, you'll be able to provide feedback to other people, your level, below, above, whatever, on whatever technical problem they're looking at. What technical stuff should you know as a developer? Falsehoods, gotchas, and assumptions. Anyone heard of these? If you haven't, here's a tester or pop quiz question. True or false? Every UK postcode has a fixed location. Hands up for true. Hands up for false. I mean, people are going to go false because it's a trick question. It is false. So you might think, oh yeah, every UK postcode, it's a fixed address because that's how addresses work, right? Nope. British Forces postcodes can be ships halfway across the world. Nothing to do with their physical location, it's the ship. And there's a few other examples. There is a really good GitHub page that has loads of these things listed in there. There's things about names, addresses, dates, times. Every time zone is offset by 1 hour, true or false? False. There's like 15-minute ones. There's a 45-minute one, I think. That's like, is it Samoa and American Samoa? Like they swapped time zones, so one is technically on the time zone that's further away from it. It's like there's all kinds of weirdness. But this is the kind of things as developers that you need to be aware of when you're writing code, especially if you're writing, say, international code, if you're dealing with basically people that aren't like you, i.e., not everyone has 2 names, not everyone has 3 names, not everyone has a first name and a surname, not everyone uses the first name as their first name, all of that kind of stuff. Databases. Does anyone not work with a database? Learn databases. Okay, specifically how indexing works. Okay, if you're working at any kind of scale, you will at some point come across a problem where the query that you've written is really, really slow under a certain amount of traffic. It could be a quite small amount of traffic, or you could be at massive scale. More often than not, indexing will help you if you haven't even thought about it. All right, so learn database indexing. It's really, really useful, especially as you start getting to higher levels. You'll be able to spot problems. I've lost count of the number of times I can look at a Datadog dashboard and some developer will be like, oh, we don't know what's wrong with our system. And I'll be like, well, look, you've got a massive spike there and another massive spike on your database. And if you look at the slow query log, oh, look, explain that. Anyone, does anyone not know what explain means in terms of SQL? So explain is basically you ask your database, explain what you're going to do when you run this query. And it will tell you whether it's MySQL or Postgres. It will tell you what its query plan will be. It will tell you what indexes it will use. It will tell you basically how performant that query is going to be. So if you run explain on a query and it says something like full table scan, that's bad because it's meaning it's searching the entire table. SQL. Anyone here using ORM exclusively? Yeah. So certainly nowadays, I think with especially like as people are starting out, there's a lot of reliance on ORMs, which are great. But when you work on bigger, more complicated systems, or you're working at bigger scale, they can break down at certain edge cases. So particularly like, high traffic, larger volumes of data, they can be just inefficient of themselves. So they get you going really quickly, but every so often it's going to be handy to go, oh, actually, maybe we need to refactor that out of the ORM and put it into raw SQL. So if you know how SQL works, and again, how indexes work and how explain works, that is an immensely useful skill set to have as a developer, because again, it's kind of language agnostic. So we're at a PHP meetup, could be a JavaScript meetup, could be a Python meetup. Everyone uses databases, everyone uses SQL, mostly. CI/CD pipelines. Who knows how their applications get from their laptop to production? Anyone do it by FTP still? So yeah, basically having an understanding of how things are built, because again, like, there are a lot of ways of doing that. How does it work for your current workplace? How do you know about those things? There's commonalities between them, there's differences, but as a developer, you should really have at least an awareness of, when I commit my code, that's not like, oh, I'm done now, like next ticket please. How does it get from there? What's the build step? What actually happens? At some point you'll be, maybe you're building a Docker container and shipping that somewhere. How does it go between environments? Like, I think most people have probably, hopefully, got more than one environment. No one's just working on production. Anyone? No, thankfully. True. So yeah, hopefully you've got at least two environments. So how do you progress things from A to B? Like, and what are good and bad ways of doing that? Again, all of this stuff doesn't mean you need to be an expert in any of these things. There's going to be particular people whose job it is to just sort out pipelines or run your database. But as a developer, especially if you want to go into those higher roles, having an understanding of how they work is going to be really important. Linux and Bash, just because I'm a massive Linux and Bash fanboy. Anyone on Windows? The Windows subsystem for Linux is your friend. I love it. You can run a full Linux install on your Windows system. So if you haven't checked it out, it's really worth looking at. You can even run Docker in it as well now. It's fantastic. But invariably, production servers run Linux. So having an understanding of how it works is going to help you if and when you get production access and you're working on complicated incidents. How do you find out how things work? You're looking at, the problem is almost, well, I say almost certainly, the problem is likely going to be your code. But it might not be. There are, especially systems now, they're very big, complicated things. How do you debug a distributed system? Finding out how to do that, Linux is really going to be really useful because it's what runs in production. And I love Bash. I like programming. Programming's great, but sometimes you can just write a really good Bash script. It's amazing. Containers. Anyone here using Docker? Anyone believe Docker and containers are the same thing? No one admitting to it. Good. So yeah, learning fundamentally how containers work. So Docker is kind of an implementation runtime type thing of containers. Whole other talk. But learning about like how containers are put together, how you can build them efficiently, again, how they fit into CI/CD pipelines. That's going to be really handy when you go somewhere and they're like, yeah, we just use Docker for everything, including all our dev environments. Anyone here got their dev environment completely running in Docker? Few people almost. Yeah, I mean, certainly for dev environments, absolute game changer. Yeah, I've done it before. Like, great gains in consistency across like people's development environments, rather than having, this one guy, his server's like 5 years old and hasn't been patched in however long, and you're like, well, no wonder it doesn't work. Half the libraries are like insecure and out of date. Maybe just try a system upgrade. Docker normalizes all of that. So if you can run your complete development environment in Docker containers, happy days. Time complexity and big O. Anyone heard of those? For those of you that haven't, it's basically how efficient is your thing, your algorithm, the function that you're calling, how efficient in time is the operation you're performing. So classic one would be looking something up in a PHP array, which is actually a hash table. So if you know the key, that is 01. It knows exactly where it is. It'll go and get it. If you need to search for something in a PHP array, I think that's ON. I forget. There is a really good Stack Overflow page that will list you the time complexity of every PHP array function. I used it loads when I was writing PHP, but it will help you understand how to write really efficient code. Because again, like, you know, if you're just doing loops upon loops upon loops upon loops, that can be really slow. So especially if you're doing like array search within a loop, you'll be able to refactor your code and make it much more simple, much more quicker by understanding time complexity. Character encoding, UTF-8, just use UTF-8, okay? But even now, in 2023, especially if you're working on anything slightly older, you may well come across stuff that is not UTF-8. And character encoding, has anyone worked on a character encoding problem? They are fun. Like, you know, days of a rabbit hole of what... so just having an understanding of like what exists other than UTF-8 and how things work. Anyone using MySQL as a database? So in MySQL, you can have a different character encoding for every column, table, database, connection, session. There's basically like 5 or 6 different character encodings. In an ideal world, they all line up and they're all just UTF-8. Every so often, you'll find one that isn't. And good luck trying to find out where that is and why your web page is displaying question marks or other random gibberish rather than whatever you want it to be displaying. So yeah, character encoding. Probably in this day and age, you don't need to go into massive depth of it. But there's a really good article even about UTF-8. I can't remember who wrote it. Things every developer should know about UTF-8. So even just starting there is a really good starting point. Distributed systems. And when I say distributed systems, I don't necessarily mean Kubernetes or all that other fancy stuff. You're running PHP applications, you're running a database. That's technically a distributed system. There's a network in between. There could be problems. Okay, even if you're running it on the same server, there's still something in between. Okay, so understanding things like latency, caching, queues, replication, how bigger systems work. So if you're perhaps working on smaller projects, you're not necessarily working with a distributed system and to the same degree of, you know, like Google and Netflix with all their thousands of microservices. Okay. But if you're looking to level up, I guarantee you a bigger company that you're going to want to go to is going to be using more complicated things like Kubernetes, maybe even serverless stuff, and all kinds of weird tech all over the place. So understanding how distributed systems work in the generic sense of latency when you're calling things, how slow things are, how things are cached, etc., is going to be really helpful for understanding and being able to design and build those more complicated systems. Great. There's a bunch of tech stuff, and I bet all of you were like, oh, I was expecting like some PHP libraries and stuff. The real secret to leveling up is that don't pigeonhole yourself into a single language. Hence, all of that stuff is completely language agnostic, because it can enable you to talk to anyone about any topic and system, because everyone has the same problems. So how are we going to improve our technical skills? Read. Top 10 programming books. Who's read a programming book? Or who's Googled that and read one of the books that came up? Like, I'm quite old, so I used to have a library of books that I used to haul between jobs. Every time I left a job, I'd have to lug like a suitcase full of books out, because you know the internet didn't exist. I know it did, but yeah, read them. They're the top 10 for a reason. What I would say is if you do read them, so the likes of Code Complete, Clean Code, algorithms, all that kind of stuff, don't treat it as dogma. Some of them are written quite a few years ago. They're going to show you ways of doing things and approaches. It's not the only way. It might not even be the correct way now. So take it on board, but don't be like, oh, I read a book, now I know this thing, I'm going to do this. I did that. Don't do what I did. I read I say every book. I read a lot of books on design patterns and application architecture patterns, and disappeared down a rabbit hole for about 2 years of like, oh, this is amazing, and confused myself and basically achieved very little in that time. Even though, oh, it's in this book, it's amazing. Okay, so fold it into how you work, but don't make that all that you do. Reading code and documentation. Yes, I've known a developer in the past who said, I don't read documentation. I don't understand how, but there we go. Read code. The other day, I was debugging a particular production issue, and I found myself reading the Postgres C source code for how locking is implemented. I don't really know why. It's just the rabbit hole, and that's kind of where I ended up. But reading code, regardless of whether it's your language, a different language, will help you get better at spotting bad code, seeing good code, and like, oh, that's a nice way of doing that. Yeah, I'm sure you've probably done code reviews before, and you've seen someone come along and go, oh, what is that? Like monstrosity of spaghettiness. Or you've gone like, have you heard of like a line feed character? Because someone's written this wonderful one-liner that you absolutely cannot read, even though it looks really nice. I just don't know what that does. Write some code. Write something in a different language. So we're at a PHP meetup. Anyone here got the job title PHP developer? No, awesome. It used to be quite a big thing. Everyone was like a PHP developer or a JavaScript developer. Hopefully nowadays, most people are just developers. Obviously, PHP being the tool that you use to do your job. But learn a different language. Yeah. Maybe that's what you want to do, and how you're going to get there. But just writing something in a different language will open your eyes to different ways of doing things and make your PHP better. Practice solving defined or limited problems like code carters. So you can Google that. Basically, it's a really simple, narrow problem, and you just write it either in PHP. It's a bit like code golf, that kind of thing. So it's just a really short problem, like write an algorithm that does this. Okay, cool. And you think, oh, that's really easy. And then you go, oh, actually, that's a little bit trickier than I thought. And there's a good way of learning different languages, rather than just doing, oh, I'll do another Hello World web page. How are you going to do? Well, maybe you would do that in Rust, but there's other ways of writing different things to write in Rust. So pick something. Side projects and tinkering. Anyone got some side projects? Random stuff they're working on at home? Like, yeah, complete gibberish locked away in private GitHub repos, never to see the light of day. Code reviews are an excellent way of improving your technical skills. I kind of said it. I can do a whole talk on good code reviews. If you've ever been in a code review and you're talking around code formatting or anything like that, it's a terrible, terrible code review. Code review should be about like learning, good algorithms for stuff, looking at something going, oh, why is that slow? Why is that not very performant? What is this 1,000 line function doing? Maybe we should refactor that. If you can do that, that's super useful, especially when you're looking at like legacy code bases. Hello, PHP. I'm sure everyone in the room has probably seen a legacy PHP code base before. They're interesting beasts by nature of the fact that PHP is so old. So yeah, code reviews are a really good way of leveling up your ability to, again, like spot good code, spot bad code, provide feedback as well. Attending a meetup or a conference. Who's attended a meetup before? Anyone been to a conference like PHP UK, anything like that? They're like meetups, but like way bigger, way better, and they have free stuff besides beer and pizza. So go to loads of swag. So for me, I was at the AWS Summit in London last week, before, whenever it was, last week, which is great because you get to go and learn a whole new stuff, see really, really in-depth technical talks and less technical talks, see vendors, all that kind of stuff. But it's about kind of getting out of your comfort zone and your little local space of, yeah, I know how my company works, but how are other people doing stuff? And attending meetups and conferences is a really good way to find that out. Talk at a meetup or a conference. Who's given a talk at a meetup before? You might think, oh, that's something I'm never going to, how would I ever talk about that? I might be talking about how to level up as a developer. All right. And I've given a few other random talks. There are every so often sessions where we will do like lightning talks. So you can talk about for 5 minutes, like what you're currently working on. If you're worried about public speaking, start small. But again, talking at a meetup is a great way of like getting out of your little bubble, if you like. Mentoring. Maybe some of you do this already if you're a senior and you've got some junior developers on your team, but like mentoring them, making them better developers, whether officially or unofficially, but it's a really good way of improving yourself as well. And also it's a really good skill that companies like to have. If you can go to job interview and go, yeah, I like mentored like 3 people from junior to senior before I left, everyone's gonna be like, wow, you've actually got some communication skills. Come work here. So, quick pop quiz. What happens when I type a URL in a browser and press enter? This is one of my favorite interview questions, regardless of what job and technology you're applying for, whether it's a developer or infrastructure role. What happens? Really obvious stuff. So if you're looking at this going, the browser sends a web request or an HTTP request to the server. The server sends back a response. The browser renders some HTML, and then it does some additional stuff to go and get some JavaScript and CSS, etc. Rinse and repeat. Make sense? Fairly straightforward. And you might give that as an answer in an interview. And if you did that to me, I'd be like, oh, but what about networking? It's not the first thing that happens when you press enter. Like before you can talk to it, you've got to do a DNS lookup. You've got to set up a TCP connection. You've got to have a socket. Maybe you've got to set up TLS or encryption. Again, you don't actually know the ins and outs of that. I could not explain the ins and outs of TLS, but I do know it's a thing. Caching, DNS cache. Maybe it doesn't even go and talk to the server. Maybe it's sitting in your browser cache. Maybe it's sitting in a CDN cache somewhere, so it still doesn't reach the server. With your application, maybe you've got an application firewall in front of it that blocks the request because it's a bot. You've got a load balancer, so it's not even going to a server first, it's going to a load balancer and then to a server, etc. There's a really good definitive answer on GitHub where he talks around about I press enter and it completes a circuit on my keyboard and it goes all the way up to eventually talking to a server. It's really, really good. However, it's not all about tech. If you want to level up as a developer, technology and technical skills will get you so far. If you've worked with someone that is super technical but cannot communicate or play well with others, you will know what I'm talking about. So this is where context comes in. Primarily, I'm talking around communication, which is going to be how you're going to increase your context. So if you've got more context, you're going to have a better understanding of requirements and use cases, and you're going to be able to build better systems. You're going to be able to assess and communicate the impact of issues. When someone says like, oh, this thing's broken, like, what does that mean? You'll be able to say, doesn't really matter. It's a like logging thing. We can fix it. Or everything is on fire. Page everyone now, for example. Or yes, this bug is going to be costing us loads of money. We need to shut the system down, or we need to get everyone on it, etc. You might be the go-to person. I don't know if anyone thinks that or feels that this is them at work. It's been me in the past where, you know, you kind of talk to people and everyone goes, oh, you know, I'll go and ask Simon. He generally knows about stuff or be able to point me at something. So that's kind of what you can end up, especially at smaller companies or even at bigger companies to a certain extent. But if you can't speak to people, that won't be you. So what should you know? Have some business awareness. Everyone writes code. No one writes code or no one gets paid just to write code. You get paid to solve problems that your business has and make the money fundamentally. So what does your business do? Like, you know, having a bigger understanding of like fundamentally, what does my business do? How is it structured? Do you have multiple teams? Like, are you like spread all over the world? Is it just two of you in a room, or two different rooms? Like, what does that look like? What are the quarterly and yearly goals? You know, all that boring stuff where you're in meetings and people are talking about like objectives and stuff. That kind of stuff's kind of handy to know. All right. How you get it, we'll come on to. But like, that's useful to know. Like, if you wanted to refactor your entire application and that does not in any way align with one of your company's goals, good luck. Okay. But if you can line up a technical initiative that you want to do with a company goal, stuff happens. Magic. So knowing what they are can be really handy. How are things prioritized? Yeah, anyone been told that's not a priority right now? Like, okay, well, how do I get that as a priority? How do we prioritize that? I don't know. Like, help me. Yeah, so understanding how those kind of decisions are made in your company, and obviously it will vary between different companies. If you're working for an agency, how do your customers make decisions? What are their priorities? What are their goals? How do budgets work? Who's been told there's no budget? Like, well, how do I get budget? I just want to use this new tool. It's going to be really useful and really help me in my job and probably help the team. How do I get the budget? Understanding how that works. You know, do you just need to tell your manager a little bit more in advance? Because, oh yeah, we did budgets last week. You missed the cut. Oh, rats. Now I got to wait a year. Communication skills. Personality types. I think everyone's probably aware of personality types. Does anyone know what personality type they are, depending on whichever metric you want to look at? Yeah, some people, yeah. So you can go to 16 personalities, do the little quiz, and it will kind of give you a nice little label, which does not define who you are. None of them are good or bad, okay? But it will give you some insight into yourself. And if you read about the others, it will give you some insight into other people and how they might think and how they might communicate. Speaking of which, communication preferences and styles. What are yours? Do you like speaking face to face? Do you prefer Slack or email? I don't know. Do you prefer long form or short form communications? You know, different people have different ways and different preferences for communicating. And if you can understand and appreciate what those differences are, you're going to be able to talk to a wider range of people without coming across as, like, certainly what I've been in the past, which is like really technical, nerdy developer man who doesn't really understand how the rest of the world works and lives in a little bubble. That's certainly what I've done in the past, or I know for a fact how I've come across. Teamwork and how to play well with others. Okay, unless you are working or unless you're a solo startup founder, at some point you are going to need to work with other people, and other people will going to want to work for you, because otherwise they will leave. Or you will get fired for making them want to leave. So how to play well with others, really important skill to have, whether it's just people on your team, but also for different departments, different parts of the company, etc. How to compromise and negotiate. You're not going to win every single discussion, every technical argument, even doesn't matter how valid your reasoning is. Again, if there's a priority that's been decided or a decision that's been made, no one cares about your logic or how great this thing is. The decision has been made. You need to go, all right, fine, let's come back to it another time maybe. Open-mindedness. I was saying this at the beginning. Giving and receiving feedback. You are not your code. When someone says something on a code review and you don't take it personally. Yeah, if you're like, oh, that's not particularly good. Some people can be really blunt with code reviews or just feedback in general. And again, coming back to communications, like, don't take stuff personally. Realize that they probably don't understand how you want to communicate. Yeah, and you need to work out that common ground. I like to say that I've got strong opinions weekly held. I was saying earlier, I'll give you an opinion on literally anything. Even if I've got no real knowledge on it, I'll just extrapolate something. Here's an opinion, but it's weekly held. Yeah, if someone like with more knowledge comes along, or I go away and read something and it tells me, oh, there's a different answer or a different way of thinking about it, I'm like, brilliant. And that's going to be really key for leveling up as well. You know, not sticking to the thing that you know as being like, that's the objective truth and nothing will change that. You know, it's being flexible, being open-minded. Yeah, no one here, I hope, is writing PHP 4 or advocating, and that was a thing. You know, things change. You need to change with it. How do we do that? Go talk to people, obviously. Clients, customers, users. This is easier depending on what your role is. So if you're a junior developer, it's unlikely someone's going to go let you talk to a very, very important customer. But there are probably ways that can happen. So kind of explore those. Literally go and talk to people is how you can understand what the pain points are in your organization, what the problems are with your systems, and you can then use your developer skills to solve those problems. And some of them can be really easy. Listen, so anyone have all hands, lunch and learns, that kind of thing at their company? Like, vaguely pay attention to those. Yeah, pick up something new. What's happening in your business? Reading the company handbook, if you've got one. Yeah, it's always a good source of context for around your business. It might even explain, how it's structured, how budgets work, decisions, all of that kind of stuff. Knowledge bases and documentation. Anyone got a company knowledge base? Personal knowledge base. So reading and writing that. Collaborating, Slack, always a good one, or whichever thing you're using. Anyone using Teams? Oh, a few condolences if you are. Code reviews, again, I could do a whole talk on how to do good code reviews, but they're really, really good ways of communicating. RFCs, anyone have an RFC kind of procedure at work? So you want to change something, so you submit a request for comment. So here's the current state of play, here's what we're proposing, here's the pros and cons and what I've thought about, and then you have a discussion about it. That can be a really good way, again, of getting stuff done. So rather than just, we want to do this thing, write it down and go, this is this thing that we want to do, this is why we want to do it, here's the pros, cons, we've sort of negatives, here's how much it's going to cost, do some research, and things like that, then make it a lot easier to get changes through. Hopefully it won't turn off in 5 minutes. Knowledge-based documentation, workshops and training. You can go and do workshops and training, especially around soft skills. They're actually quite useful. I did one once, and it taught me a lot about communication styles. So, going to get into the end. I saw someone did this with marketing, and I thought that's quite funny. And I really, really like Ice Ice Baby, so why not? All right, stop, collaborate, and listen. So basically, as we've just said, engage with other people. Don't be like that solo developer, lives in a silo. Get out in the world, get out in your company, engage with other people. Quick to the point, no faking. Be concise and know your stuff. Yeah, some of these are very, very tenuous, but hey, no one likes people that waffle. Oh, that was a quick 5 minutes. Is it coming back? It is coming back. Kept on pursuing to the next stop. I feel like I'm doing karaoke. Bust the left and I'm heading to the next block. Persevere, but know when to change tack. So again, don't just go all over the place. Come up with a plan, kind of try and execute the plan. Maybe you want to achieve a certain thing, but if it's not going well, whatever that thing is, just know when to go. Do you know what? It's not working. Let's try something else. Maybe it's you're trying to get someone to see your point of view. Maybe it's you're trying to get something approved. Whatever it is, just know when, okay, I should probably just stop banging the drum now because I'm probably annoying people. If there was a problem, I'll solve it. It's an easy one. Just be proactive. Yeah, there's problems at work all the time. I would say that it's not my job is a really bad thing to say at any point. Not everything is your job, but you don't want to be the guy that whoever is just there going, yeah, it's not my job. Soz. Yeah, because you're not the helpful person, then you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to build some new relationships. You're not going to gain more context. So be helpful. I've done weird stuff like dismantled offices, set up, go and fix people's printers, all kinds of stuff like that. Not because I'm the printer guy, I know not, but sometimes it's just an easy fix. They could wait 2 days for IT to come back to them because they're busy doing something else. Whereas actually all it is, I just plug that in, there you go, done. And they're like, that's amazing. How did you know to do that? I don't know, just did. But yeah, just be proactive, trying to solve people's problems. Here's some good books. So if you Google top 10 programming books, some of these might come up, but some of them will not. I've read them. I think they're really, really useful. So designing data-intensive applications, I'm working way through at the moment. It will teach you a lot around how data apps work and databases, data systems, how data moves, how replications things work, different locking mechanisms, all that kind of stuff that will come across at scale that will go through it. That second one's called Code, which takes everything back to basically like semaphore and switches. And it's like a really interesting book around how computers work behind the scenes, but not in a like here's a chipset kind of way. The Art of SQL taught me to think of data in a database as sets, not as like a linear programming language type thing. And you can write some really awesome SQL queries if you come up with that, if you have that kind of mindset. Linux in a nutshell, I had that on my desk for donkey's years, just dipping into how the hell do I do this thing in Linux or Bash. The Manager's Path, I've done a spot of management in the past. I read that book. It's really useful. I would also say it's really useful for individual contributors because it goes through different levels of manager role. Someone might need to push a button. And it will explain what they do, what they need, how they think, what their priorities are, etc. So if you can understand why your manager is saying this thing, I think the remote's out there, isn't it? Have we got the remote? Just push a button on the remote. Don't know. Just make it do something. Anyway, I'll just continue till it turns off. So yeah, it's a really useful book for explaining how management roles work. And if you're talking to the CTO of a company, you're going to be talking at a different level of abstraction than like your co-developer. Like, you know, what is the problem that we're facing right now? Why is the system down? No one's going to want to hear about your weird syntax bugs. Yeah, they're going to want to know a completely different set of things. Staff Engineer's Path is another book I'm reading at the moment. Because obviously, like the staff and principal engineer roles are kind of new. Not a lot of companies have them. They've been popular over in Silicon Valley for quite a few years now, and more UK companies have cottoned on to the maybe not everyone should go into management aspect. Never Split a Difference is a book on negotiating by a former FBI hostage negotiator. It's just super interesting in terms of like how negotiation works, different tactics, dealing with different people, that kind of thing. And the last two, I don't know if you've read them or not, but they're kind of the classic DevOps novels or novellas, stories, if you like, and you read them and you go, yeah, I've worked in that kind of company and yeah, I've done that. But again, like they're really interesting in teaching you, you know, that's not necessarily how it needs to be, and that there are ways of getting out of those kind of situations. You don't have to be in a legacy company, and your only option isn't just to jump ship and go somewhere else, is that you can actually change the company. So in summary, have a rough career plan. Technical skills are obviously a must, but as you progress further in your career and you level up, context and communication skills are going to be increasingly important, especially when you're working over bigger companies, bigger areas, that kind of thing. And do push yourself outside your comfort zone. So whether that's going to meetups, whether it's learning new skills, new technologies, you know, just don't stand still. Do something that is pushing you beyond. That's fundamentally how you're going to get better.